Hello fans, do you know that? There are moments in life that look completely ordinary on the surface but carry the weight of an earthquake beneath them, and that particular morning on set was exactly one of those moments. The sun was doing its usual thing, rising lazily over the studio lot. Crew members were shuffling around with their coffee cups, adjusting lights, moving props, doing all the regular pre-filming rituals that make a production day feel alive and chaotic in that familiar, comfortable way. Actors were in their trailers getting into character, makeup artists were doing touch-ups, and everyone seemed to be going through the motions of just another typical day in Hollywood. But something was different. Something was quietly shifting in the atmosphere, and the people who've worked in this industry long enough, the ones who can read energy like a second language, they felt it immediately. There was a tension humming through the corridors, invisible but absolutely present, like the moment right before a storm breaks and the air gets thick and electric. Nobody could pinpoint exactly what it was yet, but everyone knew today was not going to be ordinary. Sonia Uche arrived on set earlier than she normally would, and that alone should have been the first clue that something significant was about to unfold. She's usually the type who times her arrival perfectly, not too early to sit around waiting, not late enough to cause delays, but today she showed up when the lot was still half empty, when the quiet morning light was just starting to filter through the studio windows. She stepped out of her car with an expression that was almost unsettling in its calmness. Not angry. Not visibly upset. Not even particularly emotional. Just calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that makes people who know you well start backing away slowly because they recognize that beneath that stillness is a conversation that's been carefully rehearsed, thought through, and is now ready to be delivered with surgical precision. People greeted her as she walked past. "Good morning, Sonia. You're here early today." And she smiled politely, nodded, exchanged pleasantries like everything was perfectly fine. But even the security guard at the entrance noticed something was different about her energy. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't distracted. She was moving with purpose, like someone who had made a decision and was now simply executing it. Meanwhile, completely unaware of the quiet storm heading his direction, Maurice was already inside the main studio building, leaning casually against the wall and laughing with one of the camera operators about some hilarious mistake that had happened during yesterday's filming. He was relaxed, shoulders loose, that easy smile on his face that everyone on set loves because it makes the whole atmosphere feel lighter. He's the type who brings positive energy to a room, who makes people feel comfortable, who can turn a tense moment into something manageable with just a joke or a kind word. So there he was, completely in his element, talking about camera angles and blooper moments, absolutely clueless that in about 5 minutes his entire day was about to take a very different turn. An assistant director was walking past when he happened to glance down the corridor and spotted Sonia making her way through the hallway. The way she was walking, steady, deliberate, focused, made him pause mid-step. He watched her for just a second, registered the look on her face, and immediately stepped aside, pressing himself against the wall like he was trying to disappear into it. He didn't know what was about to happen, but his instincts told him to get out of the way. Sonia reached the end of the hallway where Maurice was still mid-conversation, still laughing, still completely oblivious. The camera operator he was talking to looked up fast, saw Sonia approaching, and his smile faltered slightly. Maurice noticed the shift in his colleague's expression and turned around to see what had caught his attention. And there she was, standing a few feet away, looking directly at him. Not angry, not dramatic, just present and purposeful. For just a split second, and I mean the tiniest fraction of a moment, Maurice's face flickered with something that looked like recognition mixed with apprehension. Not fear exactly, but that feeling you get when you suddenly realize you've been summoned and you know the conversation isn't going to be light and casual. His smile didn't completely disappear, but it definitely dimmed, replaced by a more careful, measured expression. Sonia stopped right in front of him and folded her arms, not aggressively, not defensively, just in that way that says, "I'm here, I'm serious, and we're doing this now." She didn't say anything immediately. She just stood there, letting the weight of the moment settle between them. Maurice straightened up instinctively, his casual posture melting away as he shifted into a more attentive stance. The camera operator, bless him, suddenly remembered he had urgent business elsewhere and quietly excused himself, practically speedwalking away from what was clearly about to become a private conversation. Other crew members who had been moving around nearby also found convenient reasons to drift toward other parts of the set, though let's be real, nobody actually left. They just repositioned themselves behind equipment, around corners, anywhere they could pretend to be busy while still being within earshot. Because this is how it works in tight-knit production environments. Everyone knows everyone's business, and when something significant is about to go down, nobody wants to miss it. Sonia glanced around briefly, registered the curious eyes watching from various hiding spots, and then turned slightly, gesturing with her head toward a quieter corner near some stacked props and lighting equipment. Maurice followed without a word, and they moved together to a more secluded area that was still technically within the shared space but offered at least the illusion of privacy. They stood facing each other in that shadowed corner, surrounded by the tools of their trade, cables coiled on the floor, reflectors leaning against walls, costume racks pushed to the side. It was oddly intimate, this moment happening in the midst of such a public space, and yet somehow the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Sonia took a small breath before speaking, and Maurice could literally see her choosing her words carefully, like she was pulling them from somewhere deep and honest. "Maurice," she said softly, and her voice was so measured, so controlled, that it carried more impact than any raised voice ever could. "We need to talk." 5 words. That's all it took. 5 simple words that immediately shifted everything. Maurice felt his stomach tighten slightly because he knew, oh, he absolutely knew, what conversation was coming. He'd been avoiding it, hoping it would somehow resolve itself, telling himself that maybe things weren't as serious as they seemed. But standing there in front of Sonia, seeing the look in her eyes, he realized there was no escaping this moment anymore. Sonia didn't rush. She never does when something matters. She let the silence sit between them for a moment, giving him space to prepare himself, giving herself time to organize her thoughts. Then she started speaking, her voice low enough that Maurice had to lean in slightly to catch every word, which somehow made everything feel even more intense and personal. "Why did you allow that situation to get out of hand?" she asked, and there was no accusation in her tone, no bitterness, no anger, just genuine disappointment wrapped in honest curiosity. It was the kind of question that hits differently because it's not trying to attack you. It's just trying to understand. Maurice swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry, and took a second before responding. "I didn't expect it to escalate," he said, and even as the words left his mouth he knew how inadequate they sounded. Sonia didn't interrupt him. She didn't jump in with corrections or arguments. She just watched him, listened completely, gave him the full space to explain himself. And somehow that quiet attention made him feel even more accountable than any confrontation would have. "And now," Sonia continued after letting his words settle, "look at what people are saying. Look at what we've allowed to build around us." She wasn't being dramatic. She was just stating facts, pointing out the reality they'd both been living with but hadn't directly addressed until now. Maurice exhaled deeply, his shoulders dropping under the weight of what she was saying because she was absolutely right. The rumors, the theories, the endless online speculation, the pressure from fans and media, it had all snowballed into something massive and unmanageable, and somewhere along the way they had both just let it happen instead of confronting it head-on. Sonia's expression remained calm throughout, never breaking, never shifting into anger or frustration. She was handling this with a level of maturity and control that honestly made Maurice respect her even more than he already did. "Maurice," she said again, using his name like an anchor, pulling him back to the core of the conversation. "Do you know how this is affecting both of us?" That question landed deeper than all the others. It wasn't about blame or fault or who was right or wrong. It was about impact. It was about consequences. It was about the real, tangible ways this situation had started affecting their work, their mental health, their public image, their peace of mind. He lifted his eyes to meet hers fully, and for the first time that morning the casual, easygoing Maurice disappeared completely, replaced by someone who was genuinely processing the weight of what she was saying. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, and the apology felt real, felt sincere, felt like it came from a place of actual understanding rather than just wanting to end an uncomfortable conversation. But Sonia, beautiful, strong, no-nonsense Sonia, didn't rush to accept that apology like some people might have. She held his gaze steadily and replied with careful deliberation, "Words are fine, but they are not enough." And oh man, that response. That response was everything. Because she wasn't being harsh. She wasn't rejecting his apology. She was simply stating a truth that so many people need to hear, saying sorry is the starting point, not the finish line. Maurice nodded slowly, understanding exactly what she meant, accepting the challenge embedded in her words. He wasn't defensive about it. He didn't try to argue that his apology should be sufficient. He just absorbed what she was saying and took responsibility for needing to do better. Sonia continued, her voice still controlled but growing slightly more passionate as she spoke. People look up to us. They watch how we move, how we act, how we relate with each other. And this is where you could really see the depth of her character coming through, because she wasn't just thinking about herself or even just about Maurice. She was thinking about their responsibility as public figures, about the example they set, about the influence they have whether they ask for it or not. Behind the stacked props, 2 production assistants who had been organizing equipment were frozen in place, not even pretending to work anymore, just openly listening because this conversation had become too compelling to miss. Sonia dropped her arms from their folded position and let them fall naturally to her sides, and somehow that small gesture made her seem more vulnerable, more human, more real. "We cannot let small misunderstandings turn into public drama," she said firmly, and Maurice nodded, his expression thoughtful now rather than just apologetic. "I know," he said, his voice stronger than before, more grounded. "And I don't want that either." There was a shift happening in real time between them. What had started as Sonia confronting Maurice was gradually transforming into a genuine conversation between 2 professionals who actually care about each other and about what they are building together. Sonia stepped a little closer, not dramatically, not in an intimidating way, just closing some of the physical distance that had been between them. Her tone softened for the first time since the conversation began. "We've worked together for years, Maurice. This isn't the first challenge we've faced." And that acknowledgement of their history together, of everything they'd been through, of the foundation they'd built, it changed the entire energy of the moment. Maurice's face softened in response. "But it's the first time we let the public get ahead of the truth," he admitted, and that honesty, that willingness to name exactly what had gone wrong, was exactly what the moment needed. Sonia's eyes softened at his words. You could actually see her expression shift from disappointed to understanding, from guarded to open, from confrontational to collaborative. For a brief moment, some of the tension that had been holding the conversation together just melted away, replaced by something that looked a lot like mutual respect and genuine connection. A tiny smile tugged at the corner of her lips, so small that if you weren't watching closely you might have missed it entirely, but it was there, and it was enough. Maurice saw it and you could literally watch the anxiety drain from his body, his shoulders relaxing, his jaw unclenching, relief flooding through him. From their various hiding spots around the set, the crew members who had been eavesdropping on this whole exchange almost gasped collectively in relief, like they'd all been holding their breath waiting to see how this would resolve. Maurice took a slow, steadying breath and spoke again, this time with more firmness, more conviction, more certainty. "I'll do better. I promise." Simple words, but they carried weight because of how he said them, because of the look in his eyes when he said them. Sonia studied him carefully, her eyes searching his face for sincerity, for genuine commitment, for evidence that this promise was real and not just something he was saying to smooth things over. And whatever she saw in his expression must have satisfied her because after a moment she nodded slightly, accepting his words. But she wasn't quite done yet. Gently but firmly, she added, "Then let your actions show it." Challenge issued. Gauntlet thrown. And Maurice accepted it without hesitation, without defensiveness, without making excuses. He just nodded, understanding completely what she was asking of him and agreeing to meet that standard. They continued talking for a few more minutes, addressing specific misunderstandings, discussing timing and communication, acknowledging the rumors that had grown out of control, examining the pressure that had built up around them from all sides. And with each passing second, with each honest exchange, the air between them grew noticeably lighter. The heaviness that had been pressing down on both of them started lifting, replaced by clarity and understanding and renewed commitment to moving forward better than before. Before they stepped back into the main corridor and returned to the chaos of the production day, Sonia stopped one final time and looked at Maurice with an expression that held both firmness and warmth. "Let's move forward," she said clearly. "No more distractions. Not a suggestion. Not a hopeful wish. A statement of intent. A boundary being set. A standard being established." Maurice gave her a grateful nod, recognizing the gift she was giving him, the opportunity to rebuild trust, to prove himself, to move past this moment without it defining their entire relationship. And then, side by side, not holding hands, not touching at all, but clearly aligned, clearly united, clearly on the same page, they walked out of that secluded corner and back into the public space of the production set. The crew members who had been strategically positioned around various pieces of equipment trying to listen exchanged quick, meaningful glances with each other. Some smiled slightly. Some nodded approvingly. Some just looked relieved beyond words. Because everybody knew, without anyone having to say it explicitly, that a significant shift had just taken place right in front of them. Something that had been broken or strained or misaligned had just been repaired, realigned, and mended. And even though no official announcement was made, even though Sonia and Maurice didn't gather everyone around to explain what had just happened, everyone on that set felt the change. It was in the way they walked. In the way they carried themselves. In the energy that now flowed between them. The chemistry that had always existed was still there, but it was different now, clearer, stronger, more grounded in mutual respect and honest communication. They walked back onto the main set ready to continue the day's filming, but this time carrying a quiet, shared understanding that hadn't existed before. Sonia's expression was no longer tight and controlled. Her face had relaxed back into its natural warmth. Maurice's shoulders were no longer tense and defensive. He moved with his usual easy confidence again, but now with an added layer of purposefulness. And the crew, relieved beyond measure that whatever drama they'd been worried about had been resolved peacefully and maturely, returned to their tasks with renewed energy and enthusiasm. Behind the scenes, the gossip started immediately, because of course it did. This is a film set and gossip is practically its own department, but this time the gossip wasn't chaotic or concerned or filled with worry. It was hopeful, optimistic, excited even. People whispered things like, "They're good now," and "Did you see how they worked out together?" and "This project is finally going to move smoothly." One of the producers who had been watching the entire situation unfold from across the room nodded approvingly to himself, satisfied that whatever interpersonal issues had been bubbling under the surface had been addressed and resolved before they could derail the entire production. Peace had returned. Not the fragile, temporary peace of people avoiding difficult conversations, but the genuine, lasting peace that comes from actually working through problems and coming out stronger on the other side. The rest of the day felt noticeably lighter, brighter, almost as if the confrontation and resolution had lifted a silent weight off everyone's shoulders, not just Sonia and Maurice, but the entire cast and crew who had been affected by the tension. When filming resumed, Sonia focused fully on her scenes with an intensity and emotional availability that reminded everyone why she's considered one of the best in the industry. She delivered line after line with effortless precision, hitting every emotional beat, making every moment feel real and lived in and true. Maurice matched her energy perfectly, meeting her at every turn, hitting every cue with the kind of precision that only comes when actors are truly connected and working in sync rather than against each other. Between takes, when the camera stopped rolling and the director called for adjustments or breaks, that quiet respect between them lingered visibly in the air. They didn't have to announce that things were better. You could just see it. In how they looked at each other. In how they communicated. In the ease that had returned to their interactions. It was crystal clear to anyone paying even the slightest bit of attention that the confrontation had not broken them. Instead, somehow, it had strengthened them. It had cleared the air. It had established boundaries and expectations and mutual understanding. It had reminded them both why they work so well together and what they need to protect in order to keep that chemistry alive and healthy. And maybe, just maybe, this difficult morning conversation was actually the start of a new, more united, more honest chapter for both of them. A chapter built on direct communication rather than assumptions. A chapter grounded in mutual respect rather than unspoken expectations. A chapter where problems get addressed immediately instead of being allowed to fester and grow into something unmanageable. Because here's what nobody talks about enough when it comes to working relationships in the entertainment industry: the best partnerships aren't the ones that never have conflict. They're the ones that know how to work through conflict productively. They're the ones where both people care enough to have the hard conversations. They're the ones where accountability and grace exist in equal measure. And watching Sonia and Maurice that day, seeing how they handled a difficult situation with maturity, honesty, and mutual respect, was actually a masterclass in how professionals should navigate interpersonal challenges. Not by avoiding them. Not by letting them explode publicly. But by addressing them directly, privately, and constructively before they become something bigger than they need to be. As the day went on and word spread through the set about what had happened, because let's be honest, in production environments secrets don't stay secret for long, the overall mood shifted dramatically. People who had been walking on eggshells, worried about tension affecting the project, suddenly relaxed. Jokes started flowing more freely. Collaboration became easier. The whole atmosphere transformed from cautiously professional to genuinely enjoyable. And at the center of it all were Sonia and Maurice, now moving through the day with a renewed sense of purpose and partnership. They didn't make a big show of their reconciliation. They didn't post about it on social media or release statements or do anything performative for public consumption. They just got back to work. They focused on what they do best. They showed up fully for the project and for each other. And honestly, that's the most powerful statement they could have made. Because real change doesn't need a press release. Real growth doesn't need a dramatic announcement. Real maturity shows itself in actions, in consistency, in the quiet ways people show up differently after they've done the work to address their issues. By the time the day wrapped and people started packing up their equipment and heading home, there was a collective sense of relief and optimism that hadn't existed that morning. What could have been a disaster, a public falling out, a project derailing conflict, a friendship-ending argument, had instead become a turning point that made everything stronger. And the people who witnessed it, the crew members who had been holding their breath hoping for the best, walked away that day with a story they'd probably tell for years. Not because it was dramatic or scandalous or filled with fireworks, but because it was real. It was honest. It was two professionals who care about each other enough to have hard conversations. And in an industry that's often dominated by ego, avoidance, and performative behavior, that kind of authenticity is rare and beautiful and worth celebrating. Sonia and Maurice showed everyone watching that day what real strength looks like. It doesn't look like never having problems. It looks like addressing them head-on with grace, honesty, and respect. And that's a lesson that extends far beyond film sets and far beyond their specific situation. It's a lesson about how any of us can choose to handle conflict, not by running from it, not by letting it explode, but by walking straight into it with courage and compassion and a genuine desire to come out better on the other side.